Deep beneath the red soil of the Sahara Desert lies one of the most powerful resources on Earth. Enough uranium to potentially power entire continents for generations. This is Niger, a country most people couldn't point to on a map, yet it holds some of the richest uranium deposits ever discovered on the planet. For decades, this desert nation has quietly supplied the raw material behind nuclear power plants thousands of miles away, keeping lights on in cities its own citizens have never visited and likely never will. The numbers are staggering. Niger's uranium reserves rank among the largest anywhere on Earth, enough to fuel nuclear reactors for generations if fully utilized and properly managed. Yet despite sitting on this extraordinary underground wealth, Niger remains one of the poorest countries in the entire world. It's one of the strangest contradictions in modern economics. A nation rich in one of the most valuable resources on Earth, while most of its own population lacks even reliable access to electricity. How does that happen? How does a country holding this much raw power beneath its feet end up powerless itself, in the most literal sense? The answer involves decades of colonial history, complex international mining agreements signed long before most citizens were even born, and a global energy system that was never designed with Niger's own development in mind. This isn't just a story about rocks buried in the ground. It's a much bigger story about who controls global energy, who actually profits from it, and why the answer so rarely benefits the country the resource originally comes from. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to how uranium was first discovered here, and exactly who showed up to claim it. To understand why this uranium hasn't transformed Niger into a wealthy nation, you have to go back to the 1960s, when Niger gained independence from French colonial rule. But independence didn't mean a clean break. Mining agreements signed during and shortly after the colonial era gave foreign companies, primarily French state-backed corporations, long-term rights to extract uranium at prices set largely in their favor. For decades, uranium was mined, processed, and shipped out of the country, while Niger received only a small percentage of the actual value in royalties and taxes. Meanwhile, the majority of profits flowed back to the countries actually using the uranium, powering nuclear reactors, submarines, and power grids thousands of miles away. Uranium mined from Niger has powered a significant share of electricity used in developed nations for decades, largely through arrangements Niger had little power to renegotiate. Attempts to change these agreements over the years have often been met with resistance, complicated diplomatic pressure, and, at times, political instability within the country itself. Some analysts argue that resource-rich but politically unstable nations often struggle to negotiate fair deals precisely because instability weakens their bargaining power, creating a cycle where the wealth beneath their soil never quite translates into wealth above it. In recent years, tensions over these arrangements have escalated. Niger has pushed for renegotiated terms, greater transparency, and a larger share of profits from its own resources. Whether these efforts succeed will determine if uranium finally becomes a tool for Niger's own development, or remains what it has been for over 60 years, a resource extracted by others, for others, from a nation that can least afford to lose it. Here's the part that surprises most people. Despite sitting on some of the richest uranium deposits on Earth, less than 20% of Niger's own population has consistent access to electricity. Think about that. The raw material powering nuclear plants across other continents can't reliably light homes in the very country it comes from. Part of the problem is infrastructure. Building power plants, transmission lines, and electrical grids requires massive upfront investment. Investment that mining profits were never structured to provide, since most of that money left the country as raw, unprocessed ore. Niger exports uranium in its rawest form, meaning the far more profitable steps, processing, enrichment, and manufacturing into usable nuclear fuel, happen elsewhere in countries with the technology and infrastructure to do it. Every step of that value chain adds profit, and almost none of those profitable steps happen inside Niger's own borders. It's a pattern seen across many resource-rich developing nations, exporting raw materials cheaply, then buying back finished products at a much higher price. Economists sometimes call this the resource curse, where countries rich in valuable natural resources paradoxically struggle economically, partly because that wealth concentrates in a small sector controlled by foreign interests, while the broader economy and infrastructure remain underdeveloped. Political instability compounds the problem. Niger has experienced multiple government changes and coups in recent decades, making long-term infrastructure planning difficult and scaring off some investment that could otherwise diversify the economy beyond mining. So the uranium keeps leaving, the lights stay off in many villages, and a resource capable of powering the world continues to leave the very people living above it in the dark. A contradiction that reveals how global resource wealth doesn't automatically translate into local prosperity.
So what happens now? In recent years, Niger has pushed harder than ever to renegotiate its uranium agreements, demanding a larger share of profits and more control over its own resources. Some contracts have already been revised. New partnerships are being explored with different countries, offering potentially better terms than decades-old colonial-era agreements. There's also growing interest in developing local processing capabilities, which would allow Niger to capture more value from its uranium before it ever leaves the country, turning raw ore exports into higher-value finished products and keeping more profit within its own economy. But change is slow, and the challenges are real. Political instability continues to complicate long-term planning. Existing infrastructure gaps can't be fixed overnight, and global energy companies, accustomed to favorable decades-old arrangements, aren't always eager to renegotiate terms that have worked in their favor for so long. Still, global demand for uranium is rising again, driven by renewed interest in nuclear energy as countries search for reliable, low-carbon power sources. This shifting demand gives Niger something it hasn't always had: leverage. If Niger can successfully renegotiate fairer agreements, invest returns into local infrastructure, and stabilize its political situation, it holds the potential to transform from a resource-exporting nation into a genuine energy power in its own right. The uranium beneath the Sahara hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there, still valuable, and arguably more important now than ever as the world reconsiders nuclear power. The real question isn't whether Niger has enough uranium to power the world. It clearly does. The real question is whether it will finally get the chance to power itself first, turning what has long been someone else's resource into something the people standing on it can finally benefit from.